The rain began before dawn and did not stop, as if the sky itself refused to let go of the man Amara had just lost. She stood near the grave, her hands cold, her eyes dry. Watching people come and go with quiet condolences that felt distant and hollow, her grandfather had been more than family. He had been her anchor, the one person who never made her feel small or overlooked. Now he was gone, lowered into the earth while prayers faded into the gray air. But what unsettled her most wasn't the finality of death, it was the empty space beside her. Samir should have been there. Her brother, the one who had laughed with their grandfather just weeks ago, who had promised he would always show up when it mattered. Yet his absence stretched longer with every passing minute, turning from concern into something sharper. Amara tried calling him during the quiet moments between rituals, stepping aside as her phone rang and rang before cutting to silence. She told herself there had to be a reason, something urgent, something unavoidable. Still, a strange unease crept into her chest, a feeling she could not name but could not ignore. After the funeral ended and the last of the visitors drifted away, Amara remained behind for a moment, staring at the fresh soil as if waiting for answers. That was when the family lawyer approached her, his expression careful, almost hesitant. He spoke softly, choosing his words like they carried weight. He explained that there had been a transaction, a large one, made just hours before the funeral began. Amara didn't understand at first. Her grandfather's accounts were meant to be secure, arranged carefully so that both she and Samir would share what he left behind. But the lawyer's voice grew quieter as he confirmed what didn't make sense. The entire balance had been withdrawn, authorized access, a complete transfer. By Samir. For a second, Amara thought she had misheard him. Her mind rejected the idea instantly, trying to protect her from it. Samir wouldn't do that. Not today, not like this. But the lawyer showed her the documents, the digital confirmation, the proof that left no room for doubt. The truth didn't hit her like a storm. It settled slowly, like cold water rising around her feet. She left the cemetery without saying much to anyone, walking through the rain as if it could wash away what she had just learned. By the time she reached home, the house felt different, heavier, filled with a silence that pressed against her ears. Every corner reminded her of her grandfather, of the stories he told, the advice he gave, the quiet pride he had in both his grandchildren. Amara moved through the rooms mechanically, setting down her bag, removing her shoes, trying to focus on small, normal actions, but nothing felt normal anymore. Her thoughts circled the same question again and again. Why would Samir do this now, of all times? It didn't fit the brother she thought she knew. Yet the evidence refused to bend. Her phone buzzed just as the evening shadows began to settle. For a brief second, hope flickered. Maybe it was him calling to explain, to apologize, to say there had been a mistake, but it wasn't a call. It was a message. When she opened it, the image filled her screen before the words did. Bright sunlight, clear water stretching endlessly. A resort that looked like something out of a dream. Samir stood there smiling, relaxed, holding a drink like he didn't have a care in the world. Beneath the photo, a short message appeared, casual and almost careless. He said he needed a break and that they would talk later. Amara stared at the screen, her fingers frozen around the phone. The contrast between where she had been just hours ago and where he was now felt unreal. While she had stood in the rain saying goodbye to the one person who had held their family together, Samir had been boarding a plane, carrying away everything their grandfather had left behind. There was no apology, no urgency, no sign that he understood what he had done. In that moment, something inside Amara shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't break her into tears or anger. Instead, it hardened, like a quiet decision forming beneath the surface. She set the phone down slowly, her gaze drifting to the empty chair at the dining table where her grandfather used to sit. The house felt colder now, not because of his absence, but because of what remained. Betrayal had entered quietly, without warning, and taken something just as valuable as the inheritance itself: trust. And as the rain continued outside, tapping steadily against the windows, Amara realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about what had been taken from her in a moment when she had needed her brother the most. The grief she had been holding back began to mix with something else, something sharper and more focused. She didn't cry. She didn't call him back. She simply sat there in the growing darkness, letting the truth settle fully into place, knowing deep down that nothing between them would ever be the same again. Days passed, but Amara did not chase Samir for answers, and that silence became her strength. She woke up early, followed her routine, and spoke to people with calm control. Yet, inside her mind, something had shifted into motion. She stopped asking why and started asking how. How had Samir gained access so easily? How much had he taken? And most importantly, what had he ignored in his rush to leave? Instead of reacting, she began to observe. She visited the lawyer again, this time not as a grieving granddaughter, but as someone searching for clarity. She asked precise questions, listened carefully, and took notes. The lawyer explained that while the main account was gone, their grandfather had not placed everything in one place. There were business shares, land agreements, and long-term investments that required involvement, signatures, and patience to access. Samir had taken what was easy, what was visible, what could be spent quickly. Amara realized he had not stayed long enough to understand the full picture. That thought did not comfort her, but it gave her direction. She went through old files late into the night, sitting at the same desk where her grandfather used to work. Each paper felt like a piece of a puzzle he had left behind. There were contracts with partners, letters about small businesses he had supported, and documents that hinted at value hidden beneath simple words. Amara read everything, slowly at first, then faster as she began to understand the patterns. Her grandfather had believed in long-term growth, not quick gain. And that meant much of his legacy could not be taken in a single moment. Samir had taken the surface, but the foundation was still there. That realization sparked something steady inside her. Not excitement, but purpose. She was no longer just reacting to a betrayal, she was preparing a response. When Samir finally returned, the house felt tense even before he stepped inside. Amara heard his voice before she saw him, casual and light, as if nothing important had happened. He greeted her like any other day, dropping his bag and stretching as though he had just come back from a normal trip. His confidence unsettled her more than anger would have when. When she asked him about the money, he didn't deny it, didn't even hesitate. He simply said he had used what was his and that life was too short to wait. His tone carried no guilt, only a sense of entitlement that made her pause. For a moment, she searched his face for any sign of regret, but there was none. He believed. He had done nothing wrong. That made everything clearer. Amara didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or demand anything from him. Instead, she listened, nodding slightly as if accepting his explanation. That choice confused Samir, but he didn't question it. He assumed her silence meant weakness or resignation, and that assumption became his mistake. From that day on, Amara shifted her role quietly. She offered to handle the remaining responsibilities, the things Samir had already dismissed as boring or complicated. He agreed without much thought, happy to avoid anything that required effort. He trusted her, not because he believed in her, but because he underestimated her. Amara used that trust carefully. She contacted the people her grandfather had worked with, introducing herself with quiet confidence. At first, they were unsure, seeing her as someone stepping into a role too big to fill. But she proved herself through consistency. She showed up to meetings prepared, asked thoughtful questions, and followed through on every promise. Slowly, the hesitation around her faded, replaced by respect. Each step she took strengthened her position, not just legally, but emotionally. She was no longer the person left behind at the funeral. She was becoming the one who understood the value of what remained. At home, Samir continued his life without noticing the shift. He spent freely, talked about future trips, and dismissed anything related to responsibility. Occasionally, he would joke about how serious Amara had become, but she never responded in a way that revealed her thoughts. She kept her tone neutral, her expressions controlled, and her plans hidden beneath ordinary actions. Inside, however, every move she made was intentional. She reviewed documents before asking him to sign them, presenting them in ways that seemed simple and unimportant. Samir signed without reading, trusting that none of it mattered. Each signature placed another piece into Amara's hands, building something he could not yet see. There were moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she was becoming something she didn't recognize. Late at night, she would pause, looking at her grandfather's photo, questioning whether he would approve of what she was doing. But then she would remember the message, the photo from Bali, the timing of it all, and the doubt would fade into resolve. This wasn't about hurting Samir, she told herself. It was about restoring balance, about protecting what had been left behind with care and intention. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet plan continued to grow. Amara never rushed, never made a move without understanding its impact. She let Samir believe he was still in control, still the one who had won. That illusion became the center of her strategy. While he lived in the moment, she prepared for the future. While he celebrated what he had taken, she secured what he had overlooked. And as the distance between them grew, not just physically but emotionally, Amara realized that revenge did not need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it was built in silence, shaped through patience, and carried out with a calm that made it even more effective. The moment arrived without warning, quiet and controlled, just the way Amara had planned it. It was an ordinary evening, the kind Samir never paid attention to, and that made it perfect. He sat at the dining table scrolling through his phone, relaxed and careless, unaware that everything around him was about to shift. Amara walked in, holding a simple folder, her face calm, her steps steady, showing no sign of the storm she had spent months preparing. She placed the folder in front of him without a word and took the seat across from him, her eyes fixed on his reaction. Samir barely looked up at first, flipping it open with the same lack of interest he had shown to every responsibility he had avoided. But within seconds, that ease began to fade. His fingers slowed, his posture straightened, and his expression changed from casual to confused. He started reading more carefully, turning pages with growing tension as the details became clearer. The documents were not complicated, but they carried weight. Ownership, transfers, control agreements, signatures that now meant something very different from what he had assumed when he signed them weeks ago. Samir's eyes moved faster, then stopped completely as the realization began to settle in. He looked up at Amara, searching her face for an explanation, but she remained still, composed, and silent. That silence forced him to return to the papers, to read them again, this time with urgency. Each line confirmed what he didn't want to believe, that the things he had ignored, dismissed, and signed away were now completely out of his reach. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice tighter than before, no longer confident. Amara leaned back slightly, her tone even and controlled. She explained that these were the parts of their grandfather's legacy he had overlooked, the parts that required time, effort, and understanding. While he had focused on immediate access, she had taken responsibility for everything else. Samir shook his head, trying to reject the truth, insisting there had to be a mistake. He pointed at the signatures, his own name written clearly on every page, but still tried to argue that he hadn't agreed to anything important. Amara didn't interrupt him. She let him speak, let him reach the edge of his denial before calmly reminding him that he had chosen not to read, that he had trusted her without question because he believed. Nothing she handled could ever match what he had already taken, That realization hit him harder than any accusation could. His expression shifted again, confusion giving way to something closer to shock. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the papers as if they might change if he looked long enough. "You did this on purpose," he said quietly, the confidence in his voice now replaced by disbelief. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, and it carried a weight that filled the room. Amara met his gaze without hesitation. She didn't deny it, but she didn't admit it in the way he expected either. She simply told him that she had protected what mattered. The things he had been too impatient to see. The room grew still, the air heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. For weeks, Samir ran a hand through his hair, trying to process how quickly his position had changed. Months ago, he had believed he had taken everything, that he had secured his freedom while leaving Amara behind to deal with the rest. Now he understood that what he had taken was only part of the story, and the part he had ignored held more value than he had imagined. His frustration began to rise, but it was mixed with something else, something deeper. He realized he had been outplayed, not through force or argument, but through patience and awareness. "You tricked me," he said again, his voice quieter this time, less certain. Amara shook her head slowly. She told him she had given him exactly what he wanted, nothing more and nothing less. He had chosen the easy path, and she had taken the one that required effort. There was no need to raise her voice or prove anything further, because the truth was already in front of him. The documents spoke clearly, leaving no room for doubt or negotiation. Samir looked down at the folder once more, then closed it, as if shutting it could undo what had already been done. For a brief moment, Amara felt something shift inside her, a sense of balance being restored. The weight she had carried since the funeral seemed lighter, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that her plan had worked exactly as intended. She had not shouted, not demanded, not chased after what was taken. Instead, she had built her response carefully, step by step, until this exact moment. Everything had led here, to this silent turning point where the truth stood clear between them. But as she watched Samir sit there, no longer confident, no longer certain, that feeling began to change. The satisfaction didn't grow, it faded. In its place came something unexpected, a quiet emptiness she hadn't prepared for. She had imagined this moment many times, imagined what it would feel like to reclaim control, to see him realize what he had lost. Yet now that it had happened, it didn't bring the sense of closure she thought it would. The tension in the room remained, but it had shifted direction. No longer focused on her pain, but on the space between them that had grown too wide to close. Samir didn't argue further. He didn't shout or demand anything else. Simply sat there, holding the reality he could no longer ignore. And Amara, still calm on the outside, understood something in that moment that she hadn't fully considered before. Revenge, no matter how carefully planned, did not erase what had been done. It only changed the shape of the loss. The house felt different after that night. Not louder or quieter, but emptied of something that could not return. Samir stayed for a few days, moving through the rooms with a strange distance. No longer careless, but not fully present either. He avoided long conversations, spoke only when necessary, and kept to himself, as if trying to adjust to a reality he had never expected. Amara noticed the change, but did not comment on it. She continued her routine with the same calm focus, handling calls, reviewing documents, and meeting people who now looked to her with trust instead of doubt. Everything she had worked for was finally in her hands, secure and stable, yet the satisfaction she thought would follow remained out of reach. One morning, Samir packed his bag without saying much. He stood near the door for a moment, as if considering whether to speak, but the words never came. Amara watched him quietly, her expression steady, her thoughts controlled. There was no argument left, no explanation that could undo what had already happened. He left with a simple goodbye, his voice low, carrying a weight that had not been there before. The door closed behind him, and just like that, the house became still again. Amara stood there for a few seconds, listening to the silence settle, realizing that the final part of her plan had not involved this feeling of emptiness. Days turned into weeks, and life moved forward in a steady rhythm. Amara took full responsibility for everything her grandfather had left behind. She worked with care, making decisions with patience, and slowly strengthened the foundation he had built. People respected her, not because of what she had taken, but because of how she handled what remained. Each success confirmed that she had made the right choices, that she had protected something valuable from being lost. Yet in quiet moments, when the work paused and the house grew still, her thoughts drifted back to everything that had led here. She often found herself sitting at her grandfather's desk, running her fingers over the worn surface, remembering the way he used to speak about family, about trust, about the importance of staying grounded even when things changed. Those memories felt different now, not just comforting, but also questioning. She wondered what he would think if he saw how things had unfolded, if he would understand her actions, or if he would see them as something else. That question stayed with her, not as a burden, but as a quiet reminder that every choice carries more than one meaning. One evening, while going through old papers, she found a small notebook tucked between files. It belonged to her grandfather, filled with short notes and thoughts written in his careful handwriting. She flipped through the pages slowly, reading lines about patience, about learning from mistakes, and about the way people reveal themselves. When faced with loss, one sentence stood out to her more than the rest, simple but clear. It said that true strength is not shown in taking control, but in knowing when to let go. Amara closed the notebook and sat back, letting those words settle. In her mind, she realized then that while she had regained control of the situation, she had not truly let go of the pain that started it. Her actions had been precise and effective, but they had also kept her tied to the moment of betrayal, shaping her decisions in ways she had not fully noticed before. The distance between her and Samir was no longer just about what he had done. It was about what both of them had become in response. That understanding did not bring regret, but it brought clarity. She had protected her grandfather's legacy, but she had also learned how easily trust can break and how difficult it is to rebuild. As time passed, Amara chose to focus not on what had been lost, but on what could still grow. She continued her work with a new sense of purpose, not driven by revenge, but by responsibility. The house no longer felt heavy with tension, but it also did not return to what it once was. It became something new, shaped by experience and quiet understanding. She stopped waiting for closure from Samir, stopped expecting an apology or a change that might never come. Instead, she accepted that some endings do not come with resolution, only with the choice to move forward. On a calm morning, as sunlight filled the room and softened the edges of everything around her, Amara stood by the window and looked outside, feeling a sense of stillness that had been missing for a long time. She understood now that revenge had given her a moment of control, but it had not given her peace. That came from something else, something quieter and more lasting. It came from choosing who she would be after everything had settled. She took a deep breath, letting go of the last pieces of anger she had carried. Not forgetting what happened, but no longer allowing it to define her. In the end, Amara realized that the true inheritance her grandfather had left behind was not money or property, but the ability to choose her path even when faced with loss and betrayal. She had walked through anger, through careful planning, and through the hollow feeling of victory, only to arrive at a place where she could finally see things clearly. Revenge had not destroyed her, but it had taught her something important. It showed her that while it can restore balance for a moment, it cannot heal what is broken inside. That healing comes from understanding, from growth, and from the quiet decision to move forward without carrying the weight of the past.